David.
Your leader in your party has criticized the lack of a budget, saying it amounts to a lack of a plan. We do have a clear sense, I think, of the immediate priorities of the government. So is it really a lack of a plan? And what's your sense?
Well, David, first, it would be highly unusual for a government to miss a budget. You'll recall probably in the last 20 years, COVID being the only time when the government was unable to deliver a budget, and perhaps rightfully so in the moment. But we just had an election campaign where the Prime Minister and his surrogates were saying that it was the Liberals who had a plan. I think the Prime Minister said a plan beats no plan any day, referring back to a Churchill quote. And yet here we are, it's ready for prime time. Where is it? And what can Canadians expect with respect to this moment in time, which the Prime Minister also referred to as a crisis?
Right.
And not even 1 week ago, the Bank of Canada was ringing the alarm bells in a very rare but sobering press conference where it said, the economic situation is very uncertain going forward. So I think Canadians deserve to know the financial health of the government and see what proposals the Prime Minister intends to bring forward. We will have gone almost a year and a half by the time budgetary legislation comes forward in the fall if the government keeps to the timeline it's recently suggested.
Right. So Canadians need to know an update on the financial health of the government. You can do that without a budget, right? They could give us a fiscal statement, an economic statement in the month that Parliament's apparently going to sit. But they don't seem to even be doing that. I mean, would you accept a situation where you would get an updated set of numbers and then more of a budget-style document in the fall? Because the election was only 3 weeks ago. So there is a time constraint challenge here for the Finance Department at minimum.
Well, I would say two things, David. First, of course, the throne speech would have elements in it that would perhaps also appear in a budget. That is normal. So yes, absolutely. I think the government has a point to make there. But I would say, again, they ran an election suggesting that they had a plan ready to go. The Department of Finance is filled with incredibly capable people who will have been working on a budget starting well before January, and then including the promises that the party made during the election. So my suspicion is that there is a budget basically ready to go. The question is, why is the Prime Minister deciding to not bring it forward now? The Prime Minister's also said that he'd like to change the accounting rules of the government. That could also be presenting a bit of a problem. But I think the Prime Minister is not getting off to a good start. He's setting himself up for a bit of a run-in, I think, with the rating agencies, perhaps with the Auditor General, and even in the Parliamentary Budget Officer, with respect to not showing just reasonable transparency in terms of the fiscal projections of the government. We're asking parliamentarians to vote on a tax cut that may cost the government upwards of $5 or $6 billion. But we don't know how we're going to pay for it. So, obviously tax cuts are good from a conservative perspective, but we also said we had to look at the spending side. But, these are things that discussions you would have with other parliamentarians after you see a budget and a proposed fiscal plan. So, look, if the government would like to just show us a table of where it thinks the revenues are coming and the expenses are coming and how much we're spending on debt, that would be a fiscal update, if you will. I think that would be better than nothing, of course. Right. But I do think, the Prime Minister ran on having a plan. I think Canadians deserve to see what that is.
But, you worked for Jim Flaherty, I think, when he was finance minister. Am I remembering that correctly? Before you were elected yourself. I mean, the election was April 28th. They're still counting and recounting and litigating some of the ridings. I mean, do you credit, if you won government last month, I mean, do you credibly think you could have a budget ready to go by the early weeks of June?
Well, David, I would make two quick points. Yes, I did work for Finance Minister Jim Flaherty, who was a great mentor to me, and I think one of the greatest finance ministers of my generation or our lifetime, frankly. But let's go back to look at what happened there. Federal election, government changeover in 2006, throne speech and a budget very shortly after the election. Election in 2008, throne speech, budget very shortly after the election. And by the way, 2008, during economic kind of upheaval. By the way, Mr. Carney was working in the Department of Finance at that time as well, so he's well aware of the planning that is already done by the department officials during an election. And the second point I would make is, this is a contrast that is appearing, and I'm not sure the Prime Minister is aware of the contrast that he's setting up. Pierre Poilievre said that Conservatives, if elected, and even in this current state, would be willing to work all summer to pass the necessary legislation in order to deliver the support, not just to Canadian families, but to the Canadian economy in a time of crisis. And Prime Minister Carney is getting off to not a great start by saying, look, we're going to bring Parliament back for a couple of weeks and then we're going to break for the summer. But trust us, don't worry, we'll come back with some ideas in the fall. There are a number of things that require legislation. The GST cut for new homes, as an example, which Conservatives supported during the election. In fact, ours was beyond just first-time home buyers. That requires legislation. The personal income tax reduction requires legislation. Any changes to capital gains tax rates, which Conservatives also supported, also require legislation. If you think about some of the changes that people have talked about with respect to the Impact Assessment Act, which is the No New Pipelines bill, or other regulatory reforms, all of these things require legislation. It just is a bit bewildering why we might not be wanting to debate and table those amendments, very necessary amendments to get our economy moving right now. I mean, time is of the essence. People are making investment decisions. I just think it's not a good look for the country or inspire confidence amongst investors, rating agencies, or just everyday Canadians.
Well, in 2006, Stephen Harper was sworn in as Prime Minister February 6th. The budget was May 2nd. So if we do get a large-scale financial document from the Carney government in, say, October, I mean, it's not that different than those timelines, right? Doesn't it? If you're going to get some stuff in June, and then, September when Parliament comes back. I mean, who knows when the fall economic statement will come. And they're pushing into December under the last Prime Minister. But early in the fall, would that satisfy, do you think, if we get something like that, and certainly before Halloween?
David, we'll spend all day talking about hypotheticals, but let's see what the minister has said. The fall is the fall.
Sure.
So, this is a government who waited until the last possible day to table the public accounts. The previous government ended their parliamentary, reign, not abiding by House orders to produce documents, waiting until the final days to table public accounts, asking parliamentarians to vote on spending measures before even being given the closing of the books from the previous years. I think if Mr. Carney, or Prime Minister Carney, is trying to demonstrate a change from Prime Minister Trudeau's government, this is not the way that I would have recommended he start.
So a final question or a final point to get into, Mr. Chambers, is, your party has talked about reflecting and listening and changing. Will things change when Parliament comes back on the 26th? Parliament was pretty much gummed up because of this standoff over the privilege motion, over the production of documents for months and months and months during the last Parliament. Is that coming back? Do the Conservatives plan to bring back this demand for the production of documents that the RCMP has said it isn't the right way to do it, but the government clearly was violating the privilege of the House by not complying with it, but it led to this standoff that made Parliament totally non-functional? What's your sense of whether that issue resurfaces?
Well, David, I wouldn't prejudge any discussions with my colleagues or other parliamentarians. You'll recall that the House order included support from all other parties in the House except for the government. So, that would be a discussion for multiple parties to have. I would say, the government, if it was wanting to start off on a positive note, would either A, produce the documents that were asked for the last Parliament, or B, which is a suggestion I had made that they didn't take up on, was recovering the $400 million that the Auditor General said went to companies that were ineligible. Now, look, we just had an election. The public is interested in doing things that are for the benefit of all Canadians. I do think it is a disturbing pattern to have a Parliament or a party in the House of Parliament not comply with a vote of the majority of the members. So, look, it's it's an issue that is important to me, just as someone who believes in parliamentary supremacy. I'm not sure, that's the first thing out of the gate we'll be discussing. I'll leave that to the experts in the House leaders' offices and other parliamentarians. But, I am keeping it in the back of my mind as something to recall. And by the way, the Auditor General is the one who said that hundreds of millions of dollars ended up in companies that didn't deserve to receive it in the first place. So I think, this is an issue that's probably not going away completely, but I think the government could do a good faith effort by either producing the documents or recovering some of the funds.
Okay, well, we'll see what happens after the King has finished his speech on the 27th. Adam Chambers, Ontario Conservative MP. Good to have you back on the show, sir. Thanks for your time today.
I look forward to being back more, David.
All right, thank you.